I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And today we have Jessica back again.
Yay!
Woohoo! Yes, if you haven't listened to the episode where we talk about the Telfair Academy and the Owens Thomas House and all of her experiences with that, you definitely need to go listen to it before you listen to this one. But Jessica, for those of you who might not have heard that one, Jessica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jessica Schroyer, and I am a native Savannian. I've lived here, I lived here till I was about 12, over in the Crest Hill area, and then I moved away, and then I came back. And when I came back, I worked at a couple different places and ended up landing at the Owens Thomas House, the Telfair Academy, and the Forsyth Park Inn, all at the same time.
Wow, there you go.
A ghostly trifecta.
Yes. Honestly, yes. So we're going to talk about the Forsyth Park Inn in just a second, but I do have a few announcements. So first, we want to thank some para-junkies. So we've got Katie Glotz, Elizabeth Elliott, Kyle Belvins, Ellen Etheridge, and Emily Barnett. Thank you guys so much for becoming para-junkies. We appreciate your support. And if you want to become a para-junkie, you can find us on Patreon under Savannah Underground. Also, on our website, hauntedcitypodcast.com, I'm going to be releasing some new blog posts pretty soon. So if you want to read things that I have to say about ghosts, you can definitely go check that out. Also, just as a reminder, we are going to be doing a break starting December 17th and coming back on January 1st. So basically, we're taking a break for the holidays. We're going to revisit our structure and whatnot. We're going to come up with some new content ideas. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere for long, but definitely take that time to catch up on some episodes if you haven't listened to all of them already.
We have quite a catalog of episodes, so
yes.
If you want, I think you can go back, some
right.
50 episodes or so.
You can stream us 24/7 all day long. Just get your ghostly heroin, I guess.
No, that's it. Ghost heroin.
Ghost
That
heroin.
goes on with para-junkie.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Hence, that we left it to our listeners to come up with, our patrons to come up with that name.
Yes, and they did. That was what they decided on, and I'm like, you know what? If that's what you want, that's what you got. So cool.
Gotta get that fix. Get that ghost fix.
So, the Forsyth Park Inn is probably one of my favorite bed and breakfasts in Savannah in general.
I think we've definitely stated that, haven't we?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So I used to live in the building that's literally right next door to the Forsyth Park Inn off of West Gwinnett Street. And so when I moved in there, when my parents would come to visit, it was super convenient to stay at the Forsyth Park Inn because I could just walk out the front of my building and I could be there in less than a minute. So it was, so we stayed there often, and I would come to visit them. And when I was renovating my apartment at first, I would stay at the Forsyth Park Inn. So I definitely had my own experiences with it, but because it's a very small team that works over there, I got to know the general manager pretty well, and he was the first person to ever tell me about Lottie. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you said you had an experience with Lottie. So
I've had several with Lottie, as well as all the other concierge. And I worked there prior to the current owners, or the general manager. Now it was actually a female innkeeper.
Okay.
Who worked there, or who owned the inn at the time. Her and her husband owned it, and they'd owned it for a while when I started working there. And I would work there, in the evenings or in the afternoons after I got done at the Owens Thomas House and back and forth. So I've been all over downtown at that point. But it was kind of a known thing that you would have a Lottie experience, and people would get upset. Like, I've been working here for, a while and I haven't had my Lottie experience. And we'd be like, just give it time, because that's when you least expect it.
Right.
I always felt like it tended to happen in the slow months. they like I mean, it was a house originally. Captain Aaron Churchill had built it as a winter home because they were from Nova Scotia. So they would come down here in the winter and continue on with I think he did steam shipping, things like that. And he brought his wife and their daughter, who of course later we find out is not his daughter, it's his niece or something. Anyway, that's the part of the story. But it is well known that Lottie haunts the inn. We also would hear, or I always smelled cherry cigar smoke in room 8, which is the smallest room on the upper floor, that we think was maybe a study for Captain Churchill. Now, we don't know if all the rooms were exactly like they were when the house was built. I'm sure it's changed a little bit. It was apartments at one time and a boarding house at one time. So some of the rooms are much larger than other ones. And then the bottom floor, we think, had been like an outdoor, not an outdoor kitchen, but like an outdoor space of some kind, which comes into play in another story. But they're in rooms now, talking about the dog room. Mm-hmm. That's one. And then on the other side of the dog room is, I call it the blue room, because that's what it was when I worked there. And it was all done in different shades of blue, things like that. But so it would always tend to happen in the January, February months, because it kicks off St. Patrick's Day. We're busy throughout. Sometimes in November, December, there might be a few weeks where it was empty or very, very slow. But it was typically January. All mine were in January and February. I had heard from a couple, it's typically 2 or 3 concierge, 2 or 3 housekeepers, the innkeeper, who wasn't always there if we had concierge there. But the concierge, you work by yourself a lot of the time. You might overlap for a couple hours just to turn rooms and get happy hour going and things like that. But one afternoon, I had gone into every single room, because that's the idea, is you go in every room. If no one's there especially, it was in January, went into every single room to make sure, it's ready for a walk-in if we get one, or ready for a check-in if we get one. You turn off all the lights, close all the doors, lock them, it just had a regular lock on it. I had done all that upstairs, because I didn't want to have to keep going up and down the stairs, So I had done all that upstairs, and I had set the keys on the desk, because I was known for setting them down and losing them. So I was like, I'm going to set them on the desk so I always know where they are. And I remember setting them on the desk and saying, on the desk, so that I knew that's where they were. And then I went down the hall to the other rooms to had checked them. They were already locked, so I had checked them, made sure they were right. I went downstairs to do something in the kitchen, came back up. I think I was getting water or something in case someone came in. Came back up, and the keys were gone. And I'm like, now I know I set them on the desk, because I remember saying on the desk. And I went into the parlor, and they were sitting, because the parlor is right off the entryway, and it was a big yellow room, and it had a beautiful fireplace in it, and it was sitting on the tile of the hearth, not on the mantle, on the hearth. And I was like, why would I put the keys? Like on the mantle, yes. Okay, sure, I could have, sure. Maybe I put it there. But I would have never set them on the hearth, and that was weird. So I was like, okay. So I pick them back up, I go take them back to the middle, or to the room, or to the lobby, and I put them on the desk, and I remember saying, on the desk. I didn't put them in the drawer that time. I should have put them in the drawer, and then I would have found them again. But no, I put them on the desk, said on the desk, went into the parlor to finish what I was doing. What did I do? Oh, I heard the doors opening, and I was like, what? Because they're loud. They have like the big doorknobs on them, whatever. It was loud. I was like, that sounds like a door opening. So I went down the hall to check the doors, and it was open. It was room 4? I think it was room 4, the last one on the very end. Has like a sunroom on it. It was open, and I was like, now I know I locked that door, because I locked that first, and then I did the upstairs ones, and then I just checked it when I went downstairs. So I shut it, and I was like, oh, I got to get the keys. Went back, keys are gone again. This time, I was like, where are they? And I stepped to the side, and they were sitting on the landing of the stairs, because the stairs came down to a landing, down to a landing, and then 2 more steps down. They were on the landing. And I was like, all right. I'm like, Lottie, again, we have to talk to him. Lottie, I need to lock up, so I'm going to take the keys. Please stop moving them for me, because I can't find them, and then I can't lock up, and then the innkeeper's going to get mad at me, So I went, got them, went down there and locked it. Did I set them back down again? I must have set them down again to do something else. I went to the kitchen. I came back up. I locked the kitchen doors, came back up, and then heard something upstairs. So it was room 6. The door was open, all the lights were on, and the faucet was on. And I was like, all right, Lottie, come on, you know? So I turn off everything, I lock it, I bring it back down. I set it down on the count. I had all my stuff with me. And I set it down, and I went into the parlor to turn on the lights, whatever, came back. And at this point, and this was not very long, they were gone, but they were in this, the banister spindle had been off. It was sitting there, and the spindle was back in it. And they were sitting on the stair banister.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, all right, Lottie, that is enough. I'm like, I'm leaving. I just need them for a little bit longer. If you could leave me alone, let me lock up. I'm literally leaving in like 10 minutes. And nothing else, all the rooms, this time I held the keys in my hand.
Yes.
Went up and down the stairs, checked everything, and I put them in the desk where they were supposed to go, shut the drawer, and I said, I'm leaving, Lottie, have a good night. And I just left. And I said, that's the end of it. I'm not messing around again.
It's so funny.
She loves to move the keys. That was her thing for me. She didn't do it for other people, but that was her thing for me.
I believe it. I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar with Lottie, she was a young girl who lived in the house. But yeah, it's funny that you say that your experiences were only in January and February, because Lottie is kind of famous for being a transient spirit, because she shows up at it's a bed and breakfast now. Their summer home in Nova Scotia, that is now a bed and breakfast, and they report seeing her in the summer, but they don't see her in the winter. But we see her in the winter.
That's when she would have been here.
Exactly, and it makes sense. And that's not to say that, Lottie isn't haunting both of those places all year round, but it's just more active, during the time she would have been there. But
and it tends to be when you're by yourself or there's very few people.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
One or two, maybe one person, things like that.
Yeah, we talk about competing energy. The more people around, the less energy there is for a spirit to generate but I will say any spirit that can move objects, you're dealing with a very powerful and potent spirit, because you have to imagine moving an object without muscle or bone or without any physical form takes tremendous energy. And so when that spirit, when it's moving objects, that is a potent and present spirit, and one that plays gags and tricks on you, can get unsettling. That can get very unsettling very quickly. Even in good naturedness, it's like, wait a minute, really think about what's happening. Something is manifesting to the point of physical contact, to the point of physically moving things. It's like, I'm glad it's keys and not like kitchen knives.
And she did open all the. Well, I assume it was her. Opened all the cabinets. All the doors. I think maybe the oven door was open as well, and all the faucets on in the kitchen downstairs to another concierge. That was not me, but she did tell me I could say
Let's
that.
take a moment, and because I'd love to hear the story of Lottie from the point of view of the inn, because there's plenty of versions of Lottie's story going around, and it's like, I've heard variations, things that get twisted just for the telling. But what is the inn's official story?
The inn's official story, the gist of it is that Lottie and what we thought were her mother and father lived at the Owens Thomas house. No, they lived at the Forsyth Park Inn. It was their winter home, and they had brought in someone. I think they had told her it was an aunt or a cousin or something like that, because she was younger than Miss Lois, who was the Miss Churchill, younger than Miss Lois, but older than Lottie, obviously. And they brought her in kind of just as, I would say, like a companion or as like an additional house help or something. She was a part of the family, but she wasn't like a servant or anything. And the story that we've always told was that Lottie had seen her name was Anna, I believe, and Mr. Churchill canoodling. She caught them in some sort of way and felt some kind of way about it and decided to make her sick. Didn't want to kill her, but wanted to make her sick, and had used, I want to say oleander, but I could be wrong. That might be like from Myrtle's plantation, because I know they say
that's
oleander.
What I
I've
learned
always
it
heard
as.
of oleander as well.
Oleander. And I know that's a common herb to use, I guess, at that time frame. Had used it, just wanted to make her sick. They had tea or took an afternoon tea or something in the garden, which is still there. She fell ill and ended up dying. Well, when Anna passed away, Lois and Aaron decided to tell Lottie, well, that wasn't your sister, cousin, whatever it was we had told you. It was your mother. And we were taking care of you for her. She was not in a position to take care of you. And she was wrecked with guilt. And the story went that she had been committed to an insane asylum. But I never found any truth in that.
Right.
I did do some digging on my own because I'm nosy like that. I had never found any of that. I think she probably was racked with guilt and was probably a little off kilter after that. But we could never find anything that proved she had been committed to an insane asylum.
Right. I mean, that makes sense, though, that
she might have done some time in a convalescent home.
Right.
Well, and of the period, they had these kind of like health retreats that were, for the most part, asylums, but there were definitely places that people would go to recover.
Yes, and that may have happened. I don't know if that happened here in Savannah. I would assume she probably would have gone back to their original home.
Yes.
There was a time when there was a specific place that everyone cited. It might have been like Greenbrier or something like that, where people had said she went here for.
Oh yeah, I've never heard a specific place, but
well, and again, like I said, because people pepper, you're like interesting. I'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, I could never. I thought that was interesting, and surely if she had been committed to an asylum, there would have been a record.
Yeah,
but she could have gone to a health retreat, like you said.
Right, exactly.
But even that would have a record somewhere.
You would think.
Maybe
although
not.
keep in mind
pretty powerful,
the period
so
too.
Yeah.
And. If it was in Nova Scotia, that's one more level of we don't know.
Yeah, I would. And that's where they were living. That was their base,
their home,
home base. So I would assume it would have been up there. And there's no record of her passing away here. There is a record of. You can look up Aaron Churchill's death certificate. He died in that house of pneumonia, I think. Maybe an aneurysm. I can't remember, but I did look it up. Georgia Historical Society, you can find anything you want there.
Well, most things.
Most things.
Right.
Some things have been hidden, I know. But yeah, so, he still haunts the inn as well. Not as much. His is more, to my understanding, smelling the cigar smoke, people seeing like the puff of smokes or the lit end of like bigger than a cigarette, like a cigar.
The cherry.
Yeah, or even a pipe. Somebody said it wasn't a cigar, it was a pipe. Like they knew it was cherry tobacco, like a pipe, in the garden, which he would have either been in the garden or off that study. Because it's a small room, but it has a balcony. So
famously, there are cigars that were more like pipe tobacco because they're flavored, like the Dutch sweet, cigars and things like that. So endlessly fascinating. And one of the things that we talk about a lot on this show is ghosts oftentimes present themselves at a different age than when they died. You can die at the age of 90, but your ghost could be when you're 20 or 21 because of the level of energy spike in your life. If the most traumatic thing that ever happened to you when you were 18, your ability to show up oftentimes is filtered into that moment. Because the Lottie stories are great. There's so many of them. I had a friend who used to come on my ghost tours all the time, and when he would stay at the Forsyth Park Inn, and he would stay there because the very first time he was there, he said that he was facing the courtyard, the backyard, and he was walking, and it was in the middle of the night, and kind of out of the corner of his eye, he saw a woman hanging laundry. And he thought it was weird. It was for two reasons. One, it was so late, and for two, who hangs laundry anymore? Right. So it was just odd to him, and so it stopped him. And then he looked back out, and there was nothing in the yard. And he was like, I was certain that I saw a woman.
That's where the laundry room is.
Hanging laundry, and it was like, oh, that's fascinating. And so you'd hear these stories about like chores being done, and and it was like it's all beginning to fill into this kind of concept of this young woman who had chores to do in the household and went about doing them and continues to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lottie, I never saw anything with Anna. I never experienced her, and I never saw Lottie. We had some guests who, and this was a regular set of ladies, I don't know if they still come or not, but they would come every year around the same time, usually within, like December, January, February, kind of that same time, because it's low occupancy, the prices are a little bit cheaper, but they're still getting the full impact you're getting all the concierge, things like that. So they would come, it was like a girls' trip, and they had, I want to say they had checked in fairly late, but concierge was still there, and then they left for dinner. And they went to, Betty Bombers or something like that, maybe the Legion, I don't know. They went somewhere for dinner. And they came back quite late, and the concierge had told them, well, we'll leave the parlor light on for you. I leave at 9, but we'll leave the light on for you, and you have the key. We'll put some sweets and decaf coffee out for you, whatever. And okay, all right, so we'll see you in the morning, see you for breakfast, whatever. And he left. And then when they came back, they said, oh, well, look, the innkeeper must have come back, because I want to say they said they wanted to see the innkeeper while they were there, and she wasn't going to be there that night, but they said, well, we'd like to see her while we're here, because they knew her, because they'd been coming every year. And they said, oh, well, the innkeeper must have come by or must have stayed for us. She's in the parlor waiting on us. Let's go in and see her. And they open the door. They go in the parlor. No one's there. No one. And they were like, you saw her standing in the door, in the hall, in the parlor, like in the window looking out at us. And they said, well, we saw her outline because it was backlit. Yeah, absolutely. So they said something in the morning to the concierge. I think it was the same concierge. And they had said, oh, well, we thought that, she had come back for us or stayed for us to come back. And he said, no one was here last night. And y'all are the only ones in the inn. Like, there was no other guests. And they were like, okay. And they said, well, it must have been Lottie. Like, they said that.
Yeah,
because
sure.
they knew the Lottie story.
Right.
And we were like, all right, well, what did she look like? What was she wearing? And they said, we really couldn't see. It was just her outline. But it looked like she had like kind of a, I don't want to say a Gibson girl haircut or hairdo, but it was kind of like pulled up almost back, which our innkeeper did wear her hair back,
right,
like
sure.
like a chignon or whatever. But, and they said she was standing there. She was wearing a dress and standing there. Like, we could see the outline of the dress and almost see through the dress, but not, really. And they were like, must have been Lottie. And they just chalked it up to Lottie, and no big deal. Left it at that.
That's so funny.
And then another gentleman had stayed in the inn, and this was told to me at the very beginning when I first started, because I said, well, what happens if somebody leaves in the middle of the night? Do they just leave their keys on the desk and head out? And they were like, yeah, here's the story about it. So they said that this gentleman had come and stayed, and he stayed in the bottom floor on the far side because there was room for a rollaway bed, because he had his daughter with him. They were traveling. Not in the dog room, in the other room. There's room in the dog room too, but they weren't in that one. And he had the rollaway bed, and he said he had woken up in the night and he looked over, and he could see the covers thrown off the daughter's bed, and that the door to the hallway was open. And he was like, well, I don't want to roaming around this big old house by herself. She was probably 10, maybe 11. And he said he walked out into the hallway, and she was standing at the staircase that came down, the basement stairs that came down. If you went to the left, it was the kitchen. If you went to the right, it was the 2 rooms. And she's standing there, and he said she's gesturing and talking to somebody. And he was like, hey, who are you talking to? And she said, well, this little girl, she can't find her parents either. Or something like that. Right. And he was like, what? And he goes down, because he's thinking they're the only ones in the inn. So he goes down there, and he looks, and there's no one there. And she's like, yeah, this little girl. And he's like, there's no little girl there. Good night. And they pack up and left in the middle of the night. They called the innkeeper and said, we're out.
Peace.
That's understandable, though, because, oh, God, I feel like I've done something like that to my parents
before. Ghost children are scary, though, is when you're like, whoa, I don't see anything.
So,
well, yeah, to the casual, skeptic, that's a paramount experience.
I mean, she was having a full-on conversation
with the peak of anything that they're going to have is to have something that eerie happen. It's like, it's a big nope. It's a big nope moment. And one of the interesting things, too, is circling back to unlocked doors. I've heard this a lot in old homes that have been turned into beds and and inns, that sometimes doors will unlock or be wide open. And in the discussion came out the idea that, when you live in your house, you don't lock your doors.
Right.
It's unnatural to have your interior doors locked unless there's something going on the other side. So oftentimes, especially when it's like a dining room that's been turned into a bedroom or something like that, when you lock the door, it's a disruptive energy pattern. It's like, oh, why is this door locked? Why is the access to this room, denied? Right. And so you find stories like that a lot. Doors being unlocked, strangely and peculiarly, or just wide open. You know, just walk by and it's wide open. You're like, oh, that's weird. Why is this door wide open? I'm sorry. What were you about to say?
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was just saying that, like, I feel like I've done that to my parents many a times, you know, because I don't know how much you've listened to the podcast, but I see spirits and stuff. So it's, yeah, I've had plenty of experiences kind of in that realm. And for children who see spirits and encounter them, they don't think there's anything wrong with it, which I think that's why people are so frightened, because it's the nonchalantness of, you know, the child being like, oh, well, she can't find her parents, you know, and they're like, I'm concerned for this other girl, you know.
Well, yeah, and it's peculiar if it's casual. When your child is having a casual experience of something supernatural, it's dread. You know, you feel dread. Yeah. My kid was constantly talking to somebody, and you're just like, who are you talking to? What are you doing? Stop that!
Yeah, stop!
You stop that!
Stop talking to the air.
Yeah, don't do that. It's like, I'm going to draw a picture. Don't draw a picture. I do not want to see it.
Right. I don't want to see it.
Right.
It's like, oh, just keep talking. Just keep talking. Don't show me. I don't want to know.
Well, I don't want it to look like something terrifying.
Exactly.
Right. Well, that's just it. It's like,
but think about it. If it does look terrifying to me, what must it look like to them?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, just see it.
So, yeah.
Have you ever seen like I think you can do this internet search, which is children drawing their imaginary friends.
Oh my God.
Yes.
And some of them, you're just like, what?
They're like,
What
and
are
they
you
bleed
seeing?
from their eyes.
Yeah, they bleed from their eyes.
Yeah, it's like,
They
okay.
have knives
But he's
for
just a big
hands.
smile, except for the knives. You're like, what?
So one of the rumors that I heard from an employee when my parents were staying at the inn one time, they
We'll
said
have to
that,
talk off about what employee it was, because it might be the same one.
right. So there's a rocking horse in the attic. Is that a thing, or is that?
I've never been in the attic, but
Okay.
I've been in the basement area. There's a basement store. I won't say basement. It's like a storage area off of the laundry room and the kitchen area. And there was a rocking horse in there when I worked there. I think they did move it up to the attic.
Sure.
I had never been in the attic. A few of the other, mainly because I don't like to climb stairs. Like I said, I'm a chunky girl. I'm off center. I don't want to climb stairs and go into an attic because I don't want to fall through the floor or anything like that.
Sure.
But one of the concierge who has since passed away, I have a great story of his to tell. But and then the other gentleman that works there, probably the same one, I think they did move it up to the attic. So, and they've been up there. I've never been up there.
Yeah, because they told me that the rocking horse would rock on its own.
I believe that.
Yes. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, do you know if it was something that was owned by Lottie, or if it was...
Well, this kind of goes to what I was getting ready to say about the little girl that saw the other little girl. She made it sound like, later on after the fact, it was a little girl. Like another girl, 8, 9, maybe 10. My daughter's 8. I'm thinking about like how she doesn't look like a little girl to me anymore, but at that time period, they may have dressed more childlike.
Yeah.
She didn't say what she was wearing, but she came across like it's a little girl like me. Whereas Lottie, to me, is always 15, 16, maybe early 20s. And the picture we have of her, or we had of her at the inn, she was probably in her early 20s, maybe late teens. Because she's got like her hair's kind of pulled back like this, and she's wearing like a high-waisted dress, but it doesn't look like a little kid's dress.
Yeah.
And she's almost head to head with her aunt. So that says a little bit older to me. And they're on the porch, like you can tell they're at the inn. So she was clearly, wasn't somewhere else. But there was a woman, this was actually when the inn was pretty active. We were getting ready for a wedding. So the whole inn had been rented. I don't think everybody was there just yet, but the whole inn had been rented. So there were, 2 or 3 concierge at all times. We were all running around. And this woman was in room 6, which surprisingly doesn't get a lot of action, but actually one story I do have is about 6. But it normally we never heard anything about it. But she said that her husband was in the shower and she was getting ready. And because it was all family, they did have their doors open. It wasn't a big deal. But she had just pushed it shut because he was in the shower.
Sure.
So she had just pushed it to where it was resting. And she was rushing around in the room or whatever. And she went into the bathroom to do something and came back out. And the door was open. And there was a little girl standing there. And she said it was almost like a sailor suit type outfit, long hair. She said the bow in her hair was so big you could see the edges of it on the outside of her head. Sure. And she was just standing there. And she's thinking, I don't recognize this kid. Is it a niece? Is it a whatever? And the little girl just turned and walked away. She said something like, are you oh, who are you? Or who do you belong to? Or something like that, like thinking it was somebody a family member she didn't remember or recognize. And the little girl just turned and walked away. And so she stepped out in the hall and was like, did anybody else see this little, like, where'd she go?
That's plenty of creepy.
And she didn't see her.
Yeah.
And I said, she told me about it the next day. And I said, I have never seen a little girl.
Right.
I've never seen anything. I've only ever heard it. And I said, but no one's ever mentioned that before. And then when I told another concierge about it, he said, well, what about that little girl the guy and his daughter saw? And I said, so maybe...
Yeah, and it's interesting
maybe
because
she was there when it was a boarding house?
That's a good point.
I have heard of the little girl, and it was always attributed to the sliding scale of Lottie age. But very likely it is not Lottie at all. And even given that particular outfit, because you can almost trace that outfit.
That seems like I would say 1910,
1920. Yeah, exactly. That's what came to my mind was that sounds like a pretty common outfit for that period, which gives us kind of social cues as to what it is, and then it raises the question: what was all around there? What houses are close by, and we talk about homeless ghosts all the time. Ghosts that find themselves just kind of milling about, and then they see a place that has a specific energy that they like, as don't want to haunt the Forsyth Park.
And she said she didn't have any distinguishing features. It was a little girl.
And the other little girl,
she said she was more focused on her outfit.
Stated she couldn't find her parents, which is yet another indicator that you're not dealing with Lottie, who
had parents,
that at the very least, at the age of her passing, would have knowledge of the history of the family, versus possibly a child who died, because we have countless reasons why children die in early Savannah history or throughout Savannah's history. So that's an interesting one.
That is.
I mean, it could have been from the house next door, even.
That's what I mean. Exactly.
Because the house right next to the inn, where it's like the inn, the court on Hall Street, the inn, the courtyard, and then there's that very odd sort of block-shaped, very modern-looking house. I don't know what that was before.
Right, sure.
It was a house, but
what was standing on the property before it was the house that is the inn?
That's true.
Yeah,
we're not sure. I mean, I'm not sure.
That would require some digging for sure.
Absolutely.
I don't know, but I mean, there's a history of children maybe being on the property. The other concierge, who has since passed away, I got permission from his family to share this story, which they had actually never heard, because I told it to them and they said, we'd never heard that story.
Oh, well, let's hear
he
it.
told us our stories all the time, but we've never heard it. I said, oh, well, I'll tell that one then. And he was the one who had told me at the very beginning, he trained me and everything, and he had said, oh, you'll just have to wait. You'll have your Lottie story. Just wait. It'll happen. And she would run down the stairs. Like, he would hear her running up and down the hall. Maybe it wasn't her, now that we're talking about this other little girl, now that I think about it. Run down the stairs behind the desk, because the desk sat under the staircase, and he said this one, she was like up and down the stairs, like being real super playful, up and down the stairs, like stomping. And he was like, that is enough. Like, he almost quit after this one, because she was really riling him up. And he said she came down the stairs behind him, stopped on the landing, like it sounded like she jumped on the last two, like blump, blump on the last two stairs, whoop, ran out in front, giggled, like, and ran down the stairs.
That sounds like a child.
Ran down the hall.
More childish.
More childlike. But, which now relates to this other person.
Yes.
So, this other entity. So, he was like, I'm out. Like, he called the innkeeper and was like, I quit. I'm leaving my keys on the on the desk. I'm out. Whatever. But he came back. So he had stayed in the inn. This was, again, like a January, February night. There was no one in the inn, but the innkeeper had asked him to stay. I think his heat was out too. So he's like, absolutely, I'll stay, because I don't want to stay in a room with no heat, or my house with no heat. So he had stayed in the bottom left room, not the dog room, the other one. He had stayed down there, and he said he woke up in the middle of the night to what felt like someone shaking his foot. That's common. We hear that a lot. Or sure. I always heard it a lot. Somebody was shaking my foot at night, or if my toes were out, they were like grabbing them and shaking them. But he said they were like back and forth, like really shaking his foot, trying to wake him up. And he's like, pulls it under the covers, and they like patted to find his foot and started doing it again. And he was like, we're not playing this game. And he like sits up, and you can see from where he was sitting in the bed, because he showed me all this, down the, like to the edge of the door where you could see the light from the hallway. And he had turned off all the lights except for I think the parlor light in the house, because it did shine through the door. The light was on, and he could see shadows behind it. And he's like, I know we had an in kitty, but she was locked up. And he's like, I know I locked her up, but okay. But he could see several shadows kind of outside the door. And he was like, that's weird. And right about the time he's like, what's going on out there? He hears a thump against the door. He said it sounded like somebody kicked the door. But he was like, okay. Sits for a minute. He said all this happens very fast. He's telling the story. It takes a long time, but when it happened quick. He hears it again, and he said, then it sounds like a ball hitting the door, and it was rattle the door. And he was like, what the heck is going on? And he's like, hello, like calls out. Then he hears off to the side of him, and now keep in mind, this was an outside area at one time. It had been enclosed in. He said it sounded like this person was, I say she because he does say it was a female, at the end kind of corner of the bed in a chair, but there was no chair there. But he said it sounded like somebody was sitting or standing right there, and they were clapping their hands, and they were saying, my grandbabies, my grandbabies, my grandbabies, yay, my grandbabies. Like clear as day. He said it felt like somebody was in the room.
Wow.
Like I get chills thinking about it. And he like flips on the light. Of course, nobody's there. And now it sounds like it's outside in the courtyard. And I'm like, okay. And he said he gets up, he goes to the door, opens the door. Nothing's there, of course. He goes down the hall into the kitchen, out the courtyard door. I guess he could have gotten out the courtyard door from there, but it goes back to like an alley. I wouldn't have gone back there either. But he went out into the courtyard from the kitchen, and there's nothing. But he said it was clear as day, this lady. He said it sounded like a big jovial grandmother. Because like you could almost hear like, my grandbabies, like clapping her hands and cheering. And he's like, nope. And he like backed up his stuff and called the innkeeper. I almost said her name. Called the innkeeper and was like, I'm out. Wow. He probably almost quit after that too. But he's like, I will never stay here again by myself.
Wow.
And he never did.
That's fascinating. Because that's a spirit that isn't recorded. Like we hear a lot of the ghost stories, and they do tend to focus down because, like I said, they'll take any child, and make it Lottie.
Absolutely.
And that's just the way it goes. But
he said this sounded like multiple children.
Exactly.
At least two kicking a ball.
And the woman said, my grandbabies.
Right. Right.
Which harkens to a story, some story of life in the house. And, we talk about transient houses, boarding houses, places where people come sometimes regularly, sometimes stay extended periods of time. And again, those emotional peaks of their lives, it could be a family that came to stay in Savannah right when they're building a new life here, or all these interesting and wonderful things. But yeah, that's very specific. It's so specific,
Yeah, very specific. And I never heard anyone else say anything like that. And we had multiple people stay in that room, but no one ever said they heard that.
It almost feels like it might have been like the anniversary of some type of event,
sure.
like maybe like a birthday party, or like, especially because you said it used to be an outside area. And
maybe a family reunion?
Right. Like maybe like it was, the kids were playing with the ball or whatever. And obviously now there's a door where there wouldn't have been a door. So of course there's going to be some friction.
Somebody was kicking the door.
Yeah.
It was that loud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about how kids play with balls and stuff. They kick the crap out of a ball and like want to see how far it'll go. So it's like,
and it's always amazing how a small child can make so much noise in a house. So.
Right. And so it's, that's kind of what it sounds like to me. It's like that when you were telling it, I just pictured like them out in like the courtyard or something playing, and then the grandma comes in and she's like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you," or she's cheering them on,
exactly.
like
oh,
look,
playing a game.
They're playing a game, and exactly, it sounds amazingly. Like he fell into a time,
right?
Like he was the intruder in a moment. In a moment, right?
Yeah. So he had a bunch of stories. Most of his were like, pulled the cord.
Okay, I was like, we have things happen sometimes when we're filming and we're talking.
Not. I don't know. I thought I pulled the cord, but it's going that way.
So for those,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. For those of you who are just listening, sorry, one of our mics has decided to tilt on its own. There we go.
That was funny.
Yeah, sometimes, so typically when things like that happen, when Chris and I sit in here and we record multiple episodes in a row, every once in a while things decide to act odd.
Maybe that was it.
Because this place is incredibly haunted in general, so it's, they get rambunctious every once in a while. But yeah, so I love that story though. That's probably my favorite story I've ever heard come out of the Forsyth Park Inn.
Yeah,
Like I said, he's the only one that I've ever heard that from. And there have been multiple. I mean, I worked there 3, almost 4 years, and they've all had experiences of some kind, housekeepers. There were times when they were like, we won't be in the house by ourselves. Glasses of water get drunk overnight. There's little things here and there. The most common ones, like I said, were the cigar smoke, the keys getting moved all the time, hearing footsteps and clothing even rustling. It sounds like clothing rustling. Here every now and then, I never saw anything out of the corner of my eye, but other people said they did. So
yeah, I've heard countless stories from the Forsyth Park Inn, but they're piecemeal. They're moments, or they're these little and highly attributable. People quickly attribute them to Lottie. Lottie is the primary ghost I heard about. I have heard the cigar smoke. However, the weird thing about like cigar smoke is it's prevalent in a lot of locations all around Savannah. It was a very popular pastime for the gentlemen of Savannah. So and oftentimes because a lot of the old houses definitely had a definitive men's room.
It's always in the men's parlor.
Yeah, in the men's parlor, you always hear the people being like, "Oh gosh, I smell," and it's exotic tobaccos that they're smelling, so they oftentimes will be like, it's pipe smoke, or it's something fruity, or it's something like
Very
that.
Specific, yeah.
And it's like, well, you got to realize that back in the day there were probably different processes, and they're handmade, so they can throw all kinds of crazy stuff in your cigar.
Right. Really the only experiences that I ever had were done in the dog room, and it was always the weird ones where I heard an old telephone one time ringing, and it would ring incessantly in the middle of the night. And I was just like, is there an old phone in here? And I'm looking around, because you know how some bed and breakfast are. They put antiques out and things like that. I'm like, is that how the front desk tries to call you? You got an old phone down here or something? I'm like,
wake up call.
Right. I'm like, really immersive in here. Yeah. But it's but nothing, couldn't find any phone or anything. And then I always, every time I stayed down there, I would hear, because it's right by the kitchen, in the middle of the night, probably around midnight to 1 a.m. or somewhere in between, it would always sound like silverware clanking, and just the sound of almost those old antique tea sets or things like that. That's what it would sound like. And it would just go for an hour, and I'm just like, there is no way. Nobody gets paid enough to bring
tea in the middle of the night.
Exactly.
No.
And I'm like, there is no way that there's somebody down here making tea. And so I just always thought it was so odd. But as I learned more about ghosts and things like that, kitchens are so haunted. They're so haunted.
They're like a heart of a house.
It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're a workhorse of the house. People always end up hanging out in the kitchen.
Absolutely.
And there was always a lot of activity. If we weren't down there getting stuff ready, the guests didn't go to that kitchen, but there was always something going on, something baking, boiling tea, doing whatever, something was going on.
Yeah. Well, especially with the Forsyth Park Inn, because they do a really good job of making it feel very hospitable. They make breakfast for you in the morning. They have happy hour. They've got hot coffee and tea out during the middle of the day. I could see, it being a very active part. And then when you have, a more well-to-do family, they're also going to have a very active kitchen, because they're going to be like, oh, can I have a hot cup of tea?
Right.
Well, and I never heard anything. I'm sure they probably had at least maybe a housemaid or something along those lines, but I have never heard anything about it. It's always been Captain Churchill, Lottie, and now this little girl.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I never really.
I'm sure they did. They had to have had at least a housemaid. You would not have been able to keep up that house by yourself.
Absolutely.
But being a winter home, you might have had
like a house manager.
Yeah, exactly. You might have somebody who
Well-
just took care of the grounds, like on a regular basis, regardless.
Or they could have had, their one housemate or someone who, traveled with them because
I was just thinking of the off season.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the upkeep of a house, because Savannah, if you don't mind yourself, the nature will take your house.
Oh, so true. It is so true.
It will, the grass will crack
Particularly
through.
in the summer.
Particularly through the summer, which brings up a question of what if the child is that person's, the groundskeeper's child. Maybe somebody who stayed during the rest of the season in the house while, maintaining the house or caring for the house, if the child is somehow attached to that. That's just an interesting avenue of exploration. That's all. I really love ghost stories for the openness of what it could be.
Absolutely.
When you start talking, it's like, well, what makes sense? What makes sense in this avenue? Because again, they probably stayed less than 4 months,
right?
Out of the year. And escaping Nova Scotia, it may have been longer because Nova Scotia is a fierce winter. That's a winter
thinking
that
probably from like Thanksgiving to maybe Easter, maybe into April, depending on if they
I was
have
thinking
like a late,
March, from late November, December to March.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
They were leaving after St. Patrick's Day.
Right, exactly. Yeah, St. Patrick's Day was like, time to pick up. Well, here we go.
And we're still like that to this very day.
Locals are very.
We leave.
We'll be back.
I know,
I do. So it's but
absolutely.
The so it's funny though that like this little girl, the way she presents to people is so like she doesn't talk to people. That's so strange to me.
Well, I guess she was talking to the little girl because she said she couldn't find her parents.
I mean, that would make sense though, because like, I feel like even as like a child spirit, they are more apt to, talk to another child versus like an adult, because that leads me to believe she was like had a very proper upbringing.
Oh yeah, children should be seen and not heard.
Exactly.
Right.
But she just gives off now vibes of like Esther from The Orphan is what I picture her as.
I don't know if she was that creepy. I was picturing like Wednesday Addams, like the stoic face,
Sure.
no emotion.
Although the woman who encountered her didn't seem to be taken aback by her. She was
thought she
quickly
belonged with
like,
somebody.
exactly.
Right.
Which is another thing when you have an encounter that lasts that long, that is that solid. If you're not clairvoyant, if you're not used to seeing these spirits, to see something that solid and then realize, oh wait, that was nothing. That wasn't
Right.
there. That's jarring. That's a jarring experience. And again, a very powerful entity that can present itself to people who are not sensitive. And I guess we don't know whether this woman was sensitive or not, but it didn't seem like it.
She said she was more just surprised
from the encounter, because usually if you are sensitive, you are able to suss out much quicker and much, you would just have that notion. So yeah, it's interesting to hear, objects moving, solid apparition,
I thought
things
it
of
was
that
interesting
nature.
because it's always when no one's in the house.
Well, yeah.
That anyone saw anything. The ladies saw her in the parlor. There was no one else in the house. It was, the quiet months. But for this to happen when the house was so busy,
Right.
that was blowing my mind. But I guess maybe this entity thought, there's people here. Maybe my parents are here. If she's truly looking for her parents.
Absolutely.
She didn't say anything to the woman.
And
she only talked to the little girl.
I know we've spoken about it in the past. You usually see ghosts in the dead of night because the energy is more accessible to them. So when you see them in the daytime, you're dealing with a more powerful and potent entity. When you see a ghost in the daytime in a very crowded environment, again, competing for that psychic energy that we all use, that's an impressive feat, to be able to present yourself, to be able to show yourself, because that also might be a spirit that can draw on human gathering rather than being diminished by it, because so many theories about how ghosts manifest, how they present, what's going on. But it seems to me that there is like a blanket standard that we can kind of use as a rule of thumb. That's, of course there are exceptions, but that concept of dead of night, when everyone's asleep, the spirits can come out because there's not competition. They're not competing to have the energy. Show up in the day, that ghost is rooted, and children ghosts are especially rooted. We definitely touch on that a lot. Is that children can self-manifest energy. They can create their own identities and worlds to inhabit. So that gives them a leg up. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's kind of exciting to think. And now, coming up on January, might be a good time to rent a room at the Forsyth Park Inn and do an overnight. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Well,
I'm in. I'll go.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, we also like to go off of the theory too that in the winter months and when it's colder, you're tending to get the most activity because we're warm and things like that. And
right, because the classics. First encounter with a supernatural entity is a cold spot, is where the ambient energy of the room is dropping because the spirit is drawing from the heat. And when there's not a lot of heat, it seeks out heat. It seeks out where it can draw energy from, and the source of energy becomes you. A lot of people would ask, why do you turn off the lights when you do ghost hunts? Shouldn't you leave the lights on so you can ghost hunt? It's like, well, electricity is well known to be a form of energy that a spirit can feed off of, and therefore it doesn't have to present itself because there's this abundant supply. But when you turn off the lights, again, the energy source is no longer the lights, it's you. You are now the energy source in the room. And so the spirits are more likely to approach you when there's no electricity on, when there's none of these other things, which again harkens to how powerful an entity is by when it appears, how it appears. If it appears in a brightly lit room in the middle of the day with a bunch of electricity on, it's foregoing feeding to present, to be present. And that's a fascinating spirit, really.
It is. Well, thank you again, Jessica, for coming on and talking about all of your experiences and stuff. And if you want to see us go investigate the Forsyth Park Inn, maybe become a parajunkie and we'll do an exclusive. So that would be a really cool episode, and to have you there so that you can kind of take us to the good spots and whatnot in the house.
May have changed. Awesome. Some of them may have changed now, but yes,
sure,
absolutely.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. As always, if you don't follow us on social media, go ahead and follow us on TikTok under Haunted City Podcasts. You can find us on Instagram under The Most Haunted City on Earth. Make sure to check out our website for those blog posts, hauntedcitypodcast.com. And of course, Patreon. Y'all know where to go for that. So, but with that, thank you guys so much. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.